We're going to be right there in Mark chapter 9 if you'd like to join me. Before we get there, I think it's important to set the stage out of Numbers 13. You do not have to turn there, but this story is important to understanding what Jesus is experiencing here in this moment. In Numbers 13, God has brought Israel to the edge of the promised land. He's promised them this land that is fruitful, that is flowing with milk and honey. And he's told them, I will give you this land. It is yours. And so they come to the edge of the promised land, and the nation sends spies into the land to scope it out. Let's figure out how we're going to take this land. They send 12 spies, and the spies come back and they give a report to the people. They say the people of this land are huge. We look like grasshoppers in our own eyes. There's no way we can go up against them. And 10 of the 12 spies say, let's just go back to Egypt where we had mills and we had we had it good there. We didn't have to face these people. Let's go back to Egypt. And 2 of the 12 say, no, God has done so much for us. He'll do the same here. But the people of Israel, they side with the majority report, and they're hardened yet again by unbelief. They do not believe that God will give them all that he has promised him. Even though they've seen him give the 12 plagues on Egypt, they've walked on the Red Sea, they've had manna from the sky, they've had water, they've been fed, and yet they still do not believe. And God will say this to Moses: how long will these people not believe in me? And how long will they not believe in me in spite of all the things that I have done for them? How long, God says, will these people not believe? And this same unbelief characterizes the people of God up until the time of Jesus, to where in our story this morning, Jesus is going to stand there in the midst of these people and he's going to say the same thing. How long do I have to be with you? How long will you not believe? After all you've seen, will you not believe? See, unbelief hardens the heart. And this morning in our story, we're going to learn about unbelief. Unbelief in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It's what you do with your unbelief. You can either let it harden yourself and keep you at a distance from Jesus, or you can be honest about your unbelief and bring it to his feet. That's what we see this morning. Let's start in Mark chapter 9, verse 14. And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and the scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, what are you arguing about with them? Remember last week we saw the transfiguration. Jesus is on the mountain in a moment of glory, and now he comes down the mountain back into reality, and he walks up to his disciples and he finds them in a dispute with the scribes. Again, with the scribes. They're butting heads. And what we're going to figure out here is that the disciples have been brought a demon-possessed boy, and the disciples cannot cast the demon out. If you'll remember in Mark chapter 6, Jesus gave his disciples power to cast out the demonic. And here in Mark chapter 9, they find that they cannot do that. And so the scribes take advantage of this, take advantage to go at Jesus. And now Jesus walks up right in the middle of this. Pick up with me verse 17. And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, but they were not able to." Mark gives us details of this father and his boy. He says, I have brought you my boy, and he's had this demon, and every time this demon takes possession of him and it convulses him, and he goes to the ground and he's convulsing and he's foaming at the mouth, and I just feel so helpless. There's nothing that I can do for him. And I brought him to your disciples. I heard how they could cast out demons, and they traveled and cast out so many. And I heard that, and I brought him to the disciples. And I thought, for once, yes, there's hope. There's hope. But your disciples were not able to do that. Notice Jesus' words, verse 19. And he answered them, O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me. Jesus is somewhat annoyed by the moments. Oh, faithless generation. This phrase characterizes the wilderness generation throughout the Old Testament. A faithless generation. Moses calls them a corrupt and despising generation, and they're twisted. And in this context as well, Jesus is pointing back to that story in Numbers chapter 13 and 14, where the people have seen time and time again God do these wondrous deeds, these miraculous signs, and yet they still choose not to believe in the moment. And Jesus is sitting here and he's looking at his disciples. He's talking to them. He's talking to the crowd. He's talking to the scribes, all of them. And he's saying, how long am I supposed to continue to do this? How long am I supposed to do all of these mighty deeds? Heal the sick, heal the lame, cast out all these demons and feed you. I've done all these. How long am I supposed to keep doing this? And you still don't believe. You still don't buy into this. He's a little frustrated here. Verse 20, and they brought the boy to him, and when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Mark gives us vivid detail, and if you'll notice as you're reading, he repeats that detail over and over again because he wants you to get the point. He wants you to see the darkness. He wants you to feel the hopelessness with this father, and you'll resonate with his statement later on. But here it is again, bringing him to Jesus, and it looks like the problem just gets worse. And that's kind of the reality of how it is at times. We have our problems, our darkness, some things that we bring to Jesus and we hope that they get better. But a lot of times they get a lot worse before they get better. They'll eventually get better, but sometimes they get a lot worse before. So what happens here with this boy. Verse 21, and Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? I love how Jesus does this. He sees this boy and his father not just as another problem to fix, but he sees them as people, real people that he can build a relationship with. And I think there's a lesson there for us. That oftentimes we look at the good works that Jesus calls us to do, and we just think, okay, we need to do them and check the box. We just need to get them done. We forget that they're real people. They're real relationships that need to happen. And that's what Jesus is doing here. He's starting to feel with the Father. He says, how long has this been happening to him? And the father says, from childhood. And it has often cast him into the fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. This has happened a lot. I just feel so helpless. It possesses him and it tries to throw him into the fire. It tries to drown him. It tries to kill my own son, which is interesting. I just feel so helpless. Notice his statement, if you can do anything, have compassion on us. And Jesus said to them, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. He says, if you can. Jesus is drawing him out. He's drawing that unbelief out. And the problem is not in Jesus' ability. The problem is whether or not he trusts in Jesus to do that. And Jesus says, all things are possible for one who believes. One translation puts this statement, all things are powerful for one who believes. The statement is often used to talk about how you can just do something and God will magically say, poof, that'll happen. That's not what Jesus is getting at. All things are powerful. In other words, there's nothing that God can't do. The problem is whether or not you believe in that. And immediately the father cried out, verse 34. The father cried out and said, I believe, help my unbelief. I believe, help my unbelief. At first glance, that statement sounds contradictory. I believe, help my unbelief. But feel with the father for a moment. From childhood, he's watched this boy grow up. He's watched this demon control this child, and he has felt so helpless. And maybe he's taken them to a doctor. Maybe he's taken them to an exorcist. And he's had this glimmer of hope and nothing happens. And finally he hears of his disciples. And he says, okay, I'm going to take this boy. I'm going to take him to the disciples. And he brings him to the disciples. And nothing happens. He's had his hopes up so many times. He's gotten so excited that finally there's light at the end of the tunnel, only to be disappointed again. And he's sitting there with Jesus and he's saying, Jesus, I want to believe. I want to fully trust you. But if you disappoint me, I don't know what I'm going to do. If you disappoint me, if you let me down, I don't want to go down that road again. He's bringing his doubt to Jesus. And Jesus says, okay, verse 25. When Jesus saw the crowd coming together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. Verse 26, and after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out of him, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, he is dead. Again, sometimes it gets a whole lot worse before it gets better. Jesus commands this unclean spirit to come out of him, never enter him again, and it convulses the boy, sends him to the ground again, and now the boy is like a corpse. Say he's dead. And notice verse 27, but Jesus took him by the hand and raised him up, and he arose. Mark's language here is a signpost, very symbolic to the resurrection. Raised him up and arose, speaking to Jesus when he's dead and he's risen up and he has arisen. Verse 28, the scene shifts now back to the disciples. And when he had entered his house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? And he said to them, this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. Disciples are still confused. Why couldn't we do this? And Jesus says this kind can't be driven out by anything but prayer. Now it's very odd because when you go back and you read the story, you don't see Jesus praying. You just see Jesus doing it. And I think that brings us to a point very specific to prayer. Prayer is about a posture, not a technique. I think so often we think of prayer as a technique. It's just something that we do, bow your heads, get in some kind of position, and we say certain words. And that's exactly what the disciples are looking for in this moment. In this day and time when exorcisms happened, there was some kind of technique, some kind of ritual that you did to cast the demon out. And that's what they're looking for. They want a technique, but Jesus doesn't give a technique. Jesus has a posture. You see, prayer is not about technique. It's not about saying the right words at a certain time. It's not about getting in a right position. Prayer is about a posture and a heart before God. It's about walking with God in total dependence on Him. It's not about saying certain words and being in that certain spot. It's about saying, God, I'm going to fully rely on you in this day, in this moment. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to stop, bow your head every time. Prayer is dependence on Him, fully trusting Him, and walking in that relationship where you're fully leaning on Him to provide for you. So Jesus is getting at here. The disciples were not walking in that relationship, leaning on Him to provide for them. They're wanting the technique of their own ability. This story is really about unbelief. Unbelief. We have two types, two really different audiences that deal with unbelief differently. You have the disciples and the crowds that have let unbelief harden themselves and they're not able to do what Jesus has asked them to do. And then you have a man who says he's got unbelief and he's very honest about it. The lesson I want you to get this morning is to bring your fractured faith to Jesus. To bring your fractured, broken, messed up faith to Jesus. There's a myth that I think we all buy into it at times. That we have to clean ourselves up. That we have to get our act together and we have to have the perfect faith. And we have to come before Jesus. But that's not what we see here with this father. This father, his faith in Jesus, it's fractured, it's broken, it's imperfect. He has his doubts, and he's honest about his doubts. And that's really what real faith is. Real faith is not the absence of doubt. It's being honest with your doubt. It's bringing your doubt to him, allowing your doubt to draw you closer to him. That's what the Psalms are about. Read the Psalms and read David, how many times he doubts God, whether God's with him, where God's going to provide, and he continually brings that to God. Faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith is the refusal to let doubt have the final word. Yes, it's okay to doubt, but don't let that doubt harden you. Don't let that doubt separate you from God. Use that doubt to come before Jesus and say, I believe, help my unbelief. The Hebrew writer warns about two types of unbelief. He says here in Hebrews chapter 3, he says, take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. There is an unbelief that turns us away from God. The Hebrew writer says that leads you to fall away from the living God. That this unbelief is a settled resistance to not trust in God. It hears the truth, sees the evidence, but still refuses to submit to him. It allows doubt and unbelief to have the final word. And you sit there in separation from God. But the Hebrew writer talks about another weakness. He says, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we don't have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and grace to help in our time of need. This unbelief cries out for help. It's an unbelief that we do not allow to have the final word, and we use that unbelief to hold fast and draw near to the presence of God, the same way the Father did in the story. It's an unbelief that says, yes, I have my doubts. Yes, I have my weakness. But the Hebrew writer says we have a high priest who sympathizes with that weakness. So bring it to him, and you'll find mercy and grace in the time of need. Again, biblical faith, real faith, is not the absence of doubt. It's when you don't allow doubt to have the final word. This passage confronts the way that we think about faith. We've been conditioned to believe that God responds to strength, confidence, and certainty, but that's not what we see here. The Father doesn't come all polished up. He comes with honesty. I believe, help my unbelief. And Jesus doesn't turn him away. Jesus meets him right there in that moment. God is not waiting on you to fix your doubt before you come to him. He's calling you to come to him with that doubt and all, with that weakness, with that fractured faith. He's calling you to use it to draw near closer to him. And that is the invitation this morning, to come to him. Draw near to his presence. Don't allow that fractured faith, that doubt to keep you at a distance from him, but use it to draw near into his presence. This morning, if we can help you in any way, if we can help you draw near into the presence of God and help you in your struggles, I invite you to come as we stand and as we sing.